Good afternoon. I'm Lars Smith. I'm the interim dean at the Breonna School of Law, and I'd like to welcome all of you to the first annual Breonna Taylor Lecture on Structural Inequality. I would like to give special thanks, of course, to the families of Breonna Taylor and Representative Owens. Thank you for being here. I also owe great thanks to three of my colleagues, Professor Powell, Professor McNeil, and Professor Sweeney, wherever she is. She's out in the hall, without whom this would not have happened. So I'm very grateful for all of the hard work they put together in making this come together. So thank you. Professor Sweeney, thank you. So when Professors Powell and Sweeney approached me about this lecture series, they were intentional in making sure it was a community event, not just for lawyers or for academics. And one of the things that I have been thinking about over the past year is what is the mission of our law school? And one of the things that I try to tie it back to is Justice Brandeis. And I found some writings about Brandeis that talked about him wanting the law school to be part of the community and work in the community. And I think this is a great example of us doing that. We're the only law school in the city, and so we have a special role to play in our city and recognizing the events that happen here. Public service is one of those things that we do at the law school, and we're very proud of. And this program is dedicated to that effort. And the issues being addressed today, in particular, structural inequality, is not something that can be solved, of course, with one lecture. But it's important to talk about this problem in our society so that we can bring it to light and turn tragedy, perhaps, into change. So we have an exciting program today. I don't want to take up any more of your time, or our time, so thank you all for coming. And it's now my pleasure to welcome Professor Powell to the stand and look forward to the wonderful presentations we're going to have.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, honored guests, the families of Breonna Taylor and Darryl T. Owens, friends and alumni of the University and Law School, faculty, colleagues, elected officials, community leaders, and public citizens. I'm honored to welcome you to what is an institutional milestone for the University and Law School, the inaugural Breonna Taylor Lecture on Structural Inequality. In these existential times, our democracy, we think that it is important to have a lecture to explore the systemic underpinnings of structural inequality. This is our attempt to shine the light on the realities of subjugation and to offer a constructive starting point to address these societal realities. Our program today will have three components, and I will introduce each segment. The Breonna Taylor Lecture on Structural Inequality will be delivered by my esteemed colleague, Dr. Laura McNeil. She will be introduced by Lanita Baker, a distinguished alumna of the law school, incoming National Bar Association president, and attorney for the family of Breonna Taylor. She will offer some remarks about the legacy of Breonna Taylor and then introduce Dr. McNeil. And I should offer special thanks to Attorney Baker for really starting this project going, because she had Breonna Taylor's family and her attorney contact me, and we worked on this collaboratively to make this Structural Inequality Lecture a reality, and we hope that it continues from year to year. Next, we will have the presentation of the Darryl T. Owens Community Service Award by Senator Gerald Neal, another distinguished alumni of the law school, who will offer comments on the public service legacy of State Representative Owens and present the award to Amy Sherrill, who was not able to join us, but provided some remarks which I will read to you on her behalf. And finally, we have Vice President for Community Engagement, Dr. Douglas Craddock, who will make a special announcement. We hope that you enjoy the program. I'm just going to keep talking a little bit more until the person who is supposed to introduce Dr. McNeil gets here. When we first started thinking about this project. We worked and worked, but one thing that we do at the law school is we have this legacy of the Brandeis legacy. We really are committed to public service, pro bono publico. And that means that we teach our students that they have an active duty, an active obligation, an affirmative obligation to be involved in matters that help social change. And they can practice corporate law or public law or any other type of law, but we want our students to take the role of lawyer as public citizen very seriously. Justice Brandeis did that, but we're expanding his notion of the public service lawyer by looking at structural inequality. In years past, we've had symposia on public service and structural inequality, and we tried to grapple with a number of these structural issues. We had a symposium on criminal justice, criminal punishment. We had Paul Butler, the author of Chokehold, who offers an interesting and comprehensive analysis of the criminal justice system, where he says the system works as it is supposed to work, incarcerating, impacting, and imprisoning people based upon their race and the presumption of black criminality. And we also saw the role of discretionary prosecutorial misconduct. And I am so honored to bring to the podium, I'll sort of slow down a little bit, Ms. Lanita Baker, who will introduce our esteemed colleague, Laura McNeil, who will give the Structural Inequality Lecture today. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am extremely honored to be here today in representation for the family of Breonna Taylor at the inaugural Breonna Taylor Lecture on Structural Inequality. Last year, when Amy Sherald reached out to the family and told us she wanted to donate the proceeds to create something in Breonna's legacy at the University of Louisville, I immediately, without hesitation, put her in contact with Professor Cedric Powell. Having worked as his research assistant, I knew that he would take it as an honor, but also stay true to Breonna's legacy and make sure, like Amy and I and the family wanted to make sure that this gift was not whitewashed or watered down. The mere use of Breonna's name is a gift from her family. And her family deserves to continue to make sure that whenever it is used, that her name is protected, her legacy is protected. And in doing that, Amy's gift has created a pathway for future Thurgood Marshalls, for future Nicole Hannah-Jones, for future Charles Hamilton Houstons, future thought leaders and practitioners who look like Breonna and are working to eliminate systemic inequities in the areas of law, education, employment and economic opportunities, housing, and the list goes on. So before I do what I was asked to do here today, I do want to issue a challenge to the university to do right by this gift, to keep Tamika Palmer and Breonna's family informed and involved with the individuals who would benefit from this gift, to have individuals like Cedric Powell, Dr. Laura McNeil, Ricky Jones, Enid Trujillo-Sainz, involved in the selection process for the individuals who will benefit from this gift. I'm sure there are others, but those are individuals who I know and who I had the benefit of learning from and who have shaped the attorney and the person that I am. So this gift from Amy Sherald is more than a monetary gift. It is an opportunity for this university to make a change in the lives of students that normally would not benefit. I say that as someone who did not have the benefit of receiving a large financial supplement when I went to University's Law School. However, when you see me and you see the attorney that I've become, it's to show that you don't always know who the next Lanita Baker or Breonna Taylor is going to be. And so I ask, don't use the same tools as the university you've used to award these gifts. Make a change. So, earlier I mentioned the name Charles Hamilton Houston, and our keynote Dr. Laura McNeil has worked for the Charles Hamilton Houston Institute for Race and Justice at Harvard since 2012. In that capacity, she conducts national studies that explores issues of access and equity in education, employment, and criminal law. She also conducts implicit bias workshops for educators, lawyers, judges, nonprofit organizations, and various other sectors. You know Charles Hamilton Houston. You know his famous quote of, "A lawyer is either a social engineer or a parasite on society." Dr. McNeil is definitely a social engineer. She earned her BS in Communications from Florida State University, a Juris Doctorate from Washington University in St. Louis, and like most lawyers, she did not stop with the Juris Doctorate. She got a PhD in Education from Illinois State University. She is an associate professor at the University of Louisville Brandeis School of Law, where she has served on the faculty since 2012, teaching courses in public education and urban revitalization in the law, civil procedure, employment discrimination, and education law. You've seen her on CNN, CBS, MSNBC, providing legal commentary, and on BNC, where she was an on-site correspondent during the state criminal trial of Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd. Tomorrow, you can catch her giving commentary as a guest on the Dr. Phil Show. She is a much sought-after speaker for her expertise in education law and policy. Prior to joining the faculty at Brandeis, Dr. McNeil served the students at Michigan State University and Georgia State University. Additionally, she teaches a course on law and ethics each summer at Columbia University. I got to hang out with her in New York one day. Please join me in welcoming my soror of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Dr. Laura McNeil.
I want to thank Attorney Baker for that amazing introduction. Now I'm like, can I live up to all of that? So no pressure there, Lanita. Before I get started today, it's always interesting when I was discussing with my mom about this amazing opportunity and what an honor it was for me to speak at this event, celebrating the legacy of Breonna Taylor. I said, Mom, I'm nervous. I don't know if, there's no words that can really capture how amazing and awesome this young woman was, and how can I truly honor her? And, my mom said, well, that's, speak from the heart, number one, and number two, sometimes you're a little too serious, Laura, so make sure you throw in some jokes, right? But I'm reminded as a professor, every time I try to tell a joke in class, it bombs. And so I think I'm going to take the safe route and keep my jokes to myself and stick to my day job. But it's an honor today to stand before you and give the inaugural Breonna Taylor Lecture on Structural Inequality. It is my hope that each and every one of you will be inspired to honor Breonna Taylor's memory by doing everything within your power to dismantle structural inequality within our laws, our practices, and our communities. The permanence and adaptability of systemic inequalities is evident in all aspects of our society, in education, housing, health disparities, weakened anti-discrimination laws, and the dilution of voting rights protection. As a law professor and journalist, I saw structural inequality on trial before the world. This as I covered the Derek Chauvin trial, the Kim Potter trial, the trial for the killing of Ahmaud Arbery, and of course the tragic and unjustified killing of Breonna Taylor. As I covered these stories for various media outlets, I realized that we were at a turning point in society, that the soul of America was on trial. The world was watching. We witnessed firsthand a national reckoning on race and policing in America as thousands of Americans took to the streets. They took their voice to the streets, used their First Amendment rights to protest across cities, not asking for change, but demanding change. I remember the times I joined protesters on the streets of Louisville fighting for justice for Breonna Taylor, and the bitter cold Minneapolis streets marching for justice for George Floyd and Daunte Wright. These were some of the most rewarding moments of my entire life. I understood what was at stake with each step I took. Regardless of the community that I was in, I was always reminded of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s quote, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I knew that at any point in time, any of my family members could become the next victim of unjustified violence or police brutality. I knew my brother could be the next victim. I knew my father could be the next victim. I saw Breonna Taylor in all of my family members. Covering these trials and stories of police brutality was a very, very emotional journey for me because I was reminded of my vulnerability as a Black woman in a society where my life is often devalued. When I look at Breonna Taylor, I see myself, a loving daughter, a sister, and a cherished friend to many. Her family and friends describe her as having a servant's heart, someone who dedicated her entire life to helping others. I know as someone who gives implicit bias workshops, it matters who answers the call when you dial 911. It matters who shows up. And for so many people here in Louisville, Breonna Taylor was there. And it matters. This is why we have health disparities. It's not a secret that there's racial bias in our healthcare system. And she wanted to make a difference. She wanted to use her brilliance, her dedication to her community to help out. And for that, we are always grateful. Her infectious smile has touched the hearts of people all around the world. She truly is an example for us all. In my work as a journalist, I had also the privilege of interviewing George Floyd. Of interviewing George Floyd's brother and sister on numerous occasions about the devastating impact of Derek Chauvin's actions on their family. While covering the trial in Minneapolis, I was forced to watch the murder of George Floyd over and over and over again. The smirk that Derek Chauvin had on his face, the total disregard for George Floyd's life, it still haunts me today. It's a constant reminder of why we need the Black Lives Matter movement. It's a constant reminder that although we've made strides in the fight for racial equality, we have a long, long way to go. I also interviewed Daunte Wright's aunt. She trusted me with her story just hours after learning of her nephew's death. It was one of the most difficult interviews I've ever conducted. Her pain was indescribable. As she cried out for her nephew, who she affectionately called her little lemon drop, it was in that moment that I understood how important it was for me not to only tell her story with integrity, authenticity, in a raw, unsanitized form, but to also tell the stories of all the families who've lost loved ones due to police brutality or some other form of inequality. I realized in that moment that I could use my platform as a journalist, as a legal analyst, to be a voice for the voiceless, to tell the stories of the devastating impact of structural inequality throughout our nation, especially for people of color. I began to recognize and understand that I could use this media platform to follow the paths, as Attorney Lanita Baker mentioned, of social engineers like Charles Hamilton Houston, Thurgood Marshall, and James Weldon Johnson. All civil rights attorneys who use their legal training and knowledge to fight the injustices in the world. It was during this awakening that I began to realize how my own lived experiences had gotten me to this point. I thought of all the other social engineers I had encountered and learned from throughout my life. My first introduction to the power of social engineering as a conduit for reimagining social change was through my grandmother and namesake, Laura B. McNeil. She was my first example of a social engineer, someone who understood the importance of using her knowledge and training to fight inequality and bring forth meaningful change to the education system. My grandmother was born in 1912 in Lakeland, Florida, on 131 West Pear Street. As a young Black girl growing up in the South, she was raised by her mother, who made a living washing clothes for white people. My grandmother often described her childhood memories, which included watching her mother pump water from a well and wash clothes with lye soap that she made from scratch. My grandmother would often sit in the backyard and talk to her mother while she washed clothes. It was in those moments that my grandmother would receive what she would later learn in life were the lessons she needed to help her navigate a world plagued by racism and structural inequality. One of the key lessons my grandmother learned out there in the backyard with her mother was the importance of education. What her mother said is, education is the one thing no one can ever take away from you. Well, my grandmother held on to those words of wisdom, and that motivated her to be the first in her family to graduate from high school, and she went on to college to pursue a career, you guessed it, in education. After graduating from historically black HBCU college, Florida A&M University, with her bachelor's degree in education and a master's degree in educational leadership, she worked as a home economics teacher and eventually worked her way up to being a principal. She was a principal for several years. She loved her job. She loved being a role model for so many students of color. In the 1950s, news of the historic Brown v. Board of Education case began to permeate throughout the South. This landmark Supreme Court case held that racially segregated schools violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The court convened again in Brown v. Board of Education 2 because school districts still were simply turning a blind eye, showing deliberate indifference to segregating the schools. So in Brown versus Board of Education 2, they issued directives to public schools ordering them to desegregate with all deliberate speed. Well, when my grandmother's white superintendent heard the news, he immediately called her into his office. He said, "Laura, just so you know, your Negro degree from Florida A&M, it won't count when we desegregate these schools. You won't have a job in any school where white children are being taught." My grandmother got up and walked out of that superintendent's office determined to prove him wrong. She immediately applied for a master's program in the same exact discipline, educational leadership, at Columbia University in New York. She traveled to New York every summer for 2 summers and got her second master's degree in educational leadership. When the schools finally desegregated in Polk County, she was one of the only black principals to keep her job. She was my first example of a social engineer. Throughout her educational profession, she mentored hundreds and hundreds of first-generational black students, and she helped them navigate this new world of integrated schools and successfully matriculate to college. Her students went on to become, in their own right, social engineers, as doctors fighting health disparities, social workers fighting poverty, lawyers who used their legal training to fight injustices. Columbia University, I have to admit, also served as a social engineer, as a conduit for social change by providing equal access to education for my grandmother when so many other graduate schools would not admit her simply because of the color of her skin. Growing up, I remember seeing the 2 degrees hanging proudly on my grandmother's wall, a master's degree in educational leadership from Florida A&M, and a master's degree, again, in the exact same discipline from Columbia University. Those 2 identical degrees represented the dual society we see that still, unfortunately, exists today, one that privileges some while marginalizing others. But they also represent the power of social engineering. Now, more than 50 years later, I stand here today and I represent the power of social engineering. Each summer, I travel to New York to teach a course at the same College of Education where my grandmother got her graduate degree. It's Teachers College. I walk in the same hallways, I sit in the same classrooms, and it's such an honor and privilege because every step I take, I know that if it were not for her having the courage and the strength and the dedication and the resilience to say, I don't care how many doors they close, I'm gonna knock on every door until one opens. And because of her, I'm able to teach as a professor in the same program that so many years ago created a door of opportunity for her. As I walk those halls at Teachers College at Columbia University every summer, I walk those halls with pride, with joy, and determination. Determination to follow my grandmother's exemplar as a social engineer. To this end, I have mentored over 300 high school students through pipeline programs for first-generational college students also wanting to be social engineers in the field of education. These students were all living in poverty, but they were motivated by the hope and the promise of a better tomorrow through education. I remember there were many times I would take students home only to see that their electricity was out and other indicators of just living in extreme poverty. It was in those moments that I realized just how important it is for my students to see someone like me who looks like them doing well in life. I'll never forget a chance meeting on a flight, and typically I'll be honest with you, I hate when people on the airplane try to talk to me. I don't want to talk, so as soon as I sit down, I put on my headphones, don't engage, right? And I put my headphones on like I normally do because I don't want to engage. Because what happens is when you start talking to them, depending on who it is, they'll talk the whole flight, like they don't know how to wrap it up. So I had my headphones on, and the guy literally goes, "Hey," and introduces himself. I'm like, really? So I tried to be polite, and I took my, "Hi, how are you?" And then he started talking. So as I'm talking to this man, I'm realizing, they do the normal. "What do you do?" "Oh, I'm a lawyer." "Oh, I'm a lawyer." So as chance would have it, this was one of the main attorneys who litigated the Grutter versus Bollinger case. It's the affirmative action case before the Supreme Court that said that the University of Michigan could use race as one of many factors in determining admissions because they want to make sure that they have a diverse learning environment. And so as I'm talking to this man thinking, no way, and I'm looking at him and there's a question looming in my head. And I'm like, should I ask it? No, don't be too intrusive. You don't know this man. I'm like, well, he's tapped you first, right? So I looked at him. I said, "Can I ask you a personal question?" He said, "Sure." I said, "What made you, as a white man, you're a successful attorney, why would you take on this case knowing the backlash you're going to receive professionally, personally, your family? Why would you take on this case?" He paused. He looked at me, and he said, "Because of my 5-year-old daughter." He said, "I was randomly driving her to school, and I looked at her and I said, 'Hey,' because he's like her, her favorite color changes by the day. He said, 'What do you want to be when you grow up?' And he said, she looked at me and said, 'I want to be a dentist.' And he said, 'Oh, what?' And she said, 'A dentist.' And he said, 'Why do you want to be a dentist?' Because he expected her to say a princess, a fairy, the tooth fairy, anything but a dentist, right, from a 5-year-old. But he said her response was so powerful. What she said is, 'Well, Daddy, I want to be a dentist because my dentist looks like me. She has blonde hair and blue eyes.'" And so he said he realized in that moment how important it was for children to see people that look like them doing great things, not depicted in the media as criminals, as thugs, and any other negative connotations, but showing the real America. And so he said he knew ensuring access to people that look like them doing great things was important. It was important for individuals from marginalized populations to have equal access to education, to have equal access to the American dream. Well, I saw his words resonate through my classroom so many times in these pipeline programs. Black students would come in shocked. "Oh, wow, you're really a doctor?" "Yeah." I had a student, when I taught in Finland, say, I'll never forget, she said, "Wow, I thought black people only sing and dance like Beyonce. You're my first black teacher. I've never seen a black teacher before. And wow, you're really smart." And so I realized as my students, the high school students, they said, "Oh, Dr. McNeil, I'm going to be like you when I grow up." And every time they said that, it melted my heart. But my response was always, "No, you be better than me. And as you climb the ladder of success, don't forget to turn around and pull other people up with you." So as I stand here today, I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be a social engineer for equal education opportunity. My students have gone on, as I mentioned, to earn their PhDs, their MDs, their master's degrees. They've gotten high school diplomas and started their own businesses. But the point is, what this experience taught me, and I hope that you gauge from this as well, is that every single one of you in this room can make a difference. One person can make a difference. My work with these students is part of my purpose in life. It's a way to honor my grandmother's legacy as a social engineer. And moving forward, it's a way for me to honor the beautiful legacy of Breonna Taylor. It's a reminder that each of those little girls that are in my classes in the summer pipeline program could be Breonna Taylor. They have the whole world ahead of them. And it's my job as a social engineer to not only make sure they have equal access to the same resources as every American, but to make sure that our criminal justice system gives them a chance to achieve everything they can, gives them a chance to live a full life. Although my grandmother was an example of a social engineer in the field of education, what does it mean to be a social engineer in the legal field? Well, according to the famous civil rights attorney Charles Hamilton Houston, a social engineer is a highly skilled, perceptive, sensitive lawyer who understood the Constitution of the United States and knows how to explore it and use that knowledge to solve the problems of local communities and bettering the conditions of underprivileged citizens. So essentially, a social engineer in the legal field is someone who understands the law, but not just sits on that knowledge. They utilize that knowledge to bring forth meaningful change, to eliminate systemic inequalities that perpetuate discrimination, marginalization, and harmful behaviors. People like Charles Hamilton Houston, Thurgood Marshall, they mastered the art of social engineering by using the law to fight the George Wallaces of the world. In 1963, George Wallace declared, "Segregation today, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever." Well, it was those courageous social engineers who fought these types of dog whistles and other efforts to maintain discriminatory Jim Crow laws here in America. Thanks to this long list of what I also affectionately call drum majors for justice, we now have a blueprint. We have a blueprint on how to dismantle systems of structural inequality. We have a blueprint on how to eliminate systemic racism. Legends like Sojourner Truth, an abolitionist and women's rights activist who used her voice to speak about abolitionism and equality for all. We have the example of Ida B. Wells, a prominent Black investigative journalist, an educator, an activist in the early civil rights movement. We have Elizabeth Freeman. She was a nurse and midwife who successfully sued the state of Massachusetts for her freedom in 1781, becoming the first African-American enslaved woman to win freedom in her state. Her suit helped lead to the permanent abolishment of slavery in Massachusetts altogether. She was a social engineer. And we can't forget Judge Constance Baker Motley, a civil rights attorney and the first Black woman to be appointed as a federal district judge. There's also iconic civil rights attorney Freddie Gray. He represented Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and he represented Rosa Parks and Claudette Colvin when they were charged with disorderly conduct simply for refusing to give up their seat on the bus for a white passenger. Attorney Gray continued his work in fighting for injustices, fighting for voting rights, rights to education, and the right for Black people to serve on juries. So you see, for centuries, social engineers have fought the good fight, never, and I'm going to say that again, never yielding to injustices. We all must do the same. When the framers of the Constitution decided that we were 3/5 of a person, because of social engineers, we endured. When the Dred Scott decision stated that a Black man had no rights, we endured. We endured the Black codes of Reconstruction. When the Supreme Court in Plessy v. Ferguson stated that separate but equal was constitutional, serving as a catalyst for the Jim Crow era, it was two social engineers, civil rights attorneys, that helped overturn Plessy v. Ferguson and forced the court to acknowledge that separate is inherently unequal. These social engineers remind us of the power of our legal system when used as a mechanism for change. Even today, the law continues to hold the extraordinary power to correct inequalities, but social engineers must continue to lead the charge. I find hope in today's modern social engineers, such as the newly confirmed Supreme Court Justice, I call her Justice Extraordinaire, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. Her story as a Black woman, one generation removed from segregation, now appointed to the highest court in the land, is a timely reminder that change takes time, but it happens. It has taken 232 years and 115 prior appointments for a Black woman to be selected to serve on the Supreme Court in the United States. This is a shameful fact in our American history. As the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stated, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. It has been lawyers acting as social engineers that have been the arc of the universe towards justice. Attorney Brian Stevenson, founder and director of the Equal Justice Initiative, has dedicated his entire life to challenging America's unequal criminal justice system. His work has helped us reimagine how to rectify systemic practices underlying structural inequality and racial discrimination in our criminal justice system. And of course, one of our own, Attorney Lanita Baker, a law school alumni here at Brandeis, who represents the family of Breonna Taylor. She has been on the front lines fighting for justice for years, before she even got here to Brandeis School of Law. But she's a perfect example of if we give individuals with the passion and talent and brilliance like Lanita Baker the tools and legal knowledge, look at the change they can bring forth in the world. This is the purpose and the goal and the vision of the Breonna Taylor Social Justice Fellows. Lanita Baker is an example of what this dream can become. Although I focus primarily on the role that lawyers play as a social engineer, it's also important for me to emphasize that each and every one of you can be a social engineer too. We all have a moral and ethical responsibility to be social engineers promoting equality. But what does it mean to be a social engineer in the 21st century? Well, how many of you in here have signed a petition at some point? Made a donation to a cause you believe in? Maybe participated in a march or attended a public hearing? These are all examples of social engineering. Another key characteristic of social engineering in the 21st century is being an ally. Allyship is essential to challenging behaviors which perpetuate systemic bias and systemic oppression based on race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, and many other factors. As a Black woman in a predominantly white institution, I've often had my white colleagues and friends come up to me and say, "Hey, Laura, I want to help, but I don't know how to be an ally. What does it mean to be an ally? How can I help?" Well, an effective ally, I always tell them, is an individual who is conscious of their privilege and influence, and they use it to magnify the voices of the underrepresented, of marginalized groups, and they use it to bring these inequities to the surface, to the forefront, to force accountability and change. One of the primary motives behind the Say Her Name campaign, started by legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, was to shed light on Black women's experiences of police violence by empowering people to speak up, to say the names of senseless victims of police brutality. When we say Breonna Taylor's name, we are saying her life mattered, that she was valued and loved by her family and community. As an ally, saying her name not only preserves her legacy, but it pushes for accountability for the unlawful killing. Saying her name challenges the criminal justice system influenced by bias and privilege. Saying her name is saying that Black lives matter. As Senator Duckworth tweeted, she said, saying her name is about honor, saying her name is about respect, saying her name is about equal protection, saying her name is about demanding action. Saying her name is synonymous with saying no more. It's synonymous with saying We want justice. Allies speak up against injustice. If you see something, say something. Dr. Martin Luther King said, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. Breonna Taylor's life mattered. George Floyd's life mattered. Dante Wright's life mattered. Allyship, therefore, is synonymous with action. Effective allies don't just talk about the challenges, they become part of the change. They help reimagine how we can achieve the change we want to see in the world. So I encourage you, individuals that want to be allies, to educate yourself about the experience of others. It's important to educate yourself because what happens is we're all victims of unconscious biases, explicit biases in some cases as well. We are constantly bombarded with negative stereotypes that black men have a higher propensity for violence or black women. We have all these stereotypes that we assign to group characteristics that are simply not true. And so the more interaction you have with other people that are different than you, it helps dispel those stereotypes. It helps reframe the lens in which you view the world. Being a social engineer in the 21st century also means developing what I like to call collective consciousness or community consciousness. It's a term that originates from its French denomination, conscious collective. It's a commitment to a set of shared beliefs, ideas, and moral attitudes as a unifying force that is common for a social group or society. It's a level of awareness of inequities within our current social, economic, and environmental situations. In an ideal world, community consciousness develops and maintains a set of community standards which demands, not asks, but demands that everyone is treated equally. Research has shown that collective consciousness has a significant impact on participation in activism, civic engagement, and is a conduit for providing a voice for the voiceless. We know that when we have increased civic engagement, especially in communities of color, it makes a difference in who you vote in as a local prosecutor. We've seen with the Ahmaud Arbery case who the prosecutor is matters. We've seen here in Louisville who the state attorney general is matters. And so your vote counts. In closing, to Breonna Taylor's mother, Miss Tamika Palmer, thank you for finding the strength, the courage, and the resilience to be steadfast, immovable in your commitment to make sure that no other mother would experience the tremendous loss that you have. As a black woman standing here, I admire you. You are one of my sheroes. And I thank you on behalf of just all black women and just America. You turned your pain into activism and garnered enough support here to get Breonna Taylor's law passed. I don't know if you all really understand the countless lives. We'll never know the true count of how many lives Breonna's mother saved by getting behind and pushing for this law to be passed here in Louisville. And we need it passed in every city in America. So the Breonna Taylor's Justice Fellows Program is an opportunity for us, I call it an opportunity of a lifetime, to train the next generation of social engineers to reimagine social change. The Breonna Taylor Justice Fellows will serve as the gatekeepers for ensuring equal treatment in our legal system in the fight against discrimination. These fellows will be trained here at the Brandeis School of Law here in Louisville, and they're going to be trained to become socially conscious lawyers that are committed to engineering a more equitable society. They will be empowered to utilize their legal training for the greater good. They will serve as an extension of Breonna Taylor's beautiful legacy of grace, brilliance, and service to the community. an extension of what I affectionately call Black girl magic. I leave you today with this call to action. Remember, there is no act too small, no act too bold. The history of social change is the history of millions of actions, small and large, by social engineers coming together at critical points to change the world. I challenge each and every one of you to be a social engineer for change and to never forget to say her name. Breonna Taylor, Breonna Taylor, Breonna Taylor. Thank you.
Please join me again in thanking Dr. McNeil. Thank you to Dr. McNeil for a powerful, engaging, and critical lecture. You've set a high bar for future lectures by challenging us to think in new and innovative ways about dismantling systemic racism and structural inequality. I now have the privilege of bringing to the podium a distinguished alumnus of the Louis D. Brandeis School of Law, a friend of many of us here, true public citizen, public servant for many years, Senator Darryl Neal. Senator Neal will offer remarks about the public service legacy of State Representative Owens and then present the Darryl T. Owens Community Service Award to Amy Sherrill, who isn't here, but I'll accept on her behalf and offer some comments in that regard. Thank you so much. Senator Neal.
Hello, everyone. Boy, sad. After that powerful, insightful, engaging, truthful framing of the conditions of today by Dr. McNeil, and you still can't respond? Hello. All right. Thank you, Dr. McNeil. Let me say this. I have to say this before I go any further. That was powerful. And that was a perfect framing. Where's Dr. McNeil? That was just an eloquent and perfect, unvarnished framing, historically and currently, and it was enabling. I thought that was just strong, and I'm going to take that with me, and I want to invite you to the Kentucky General Assembly so that you can present it to some people that may need some of that. Oh, yeah. She thinks I'm playing. I'm not playing. The second thing is, I'm going to be one of those guys that sees you on the airport, and I'm going to keep on going, because I'm the guy that touches you on the arm. But thank you so much for that. I was completely drawn in by that presentation for the inaugural lecture. I thought that was superb. Thank you so much. Give her another round of applause, please. You know, I'm never very good at, coming behind somebody like Professor Powell, who picked out everybody he needed to pick out to thank them for being here. He did that so well. So I'm going to do this inartfully and probably not in order. Okay, so I want you all to bear with me just a little bit. Is that okay? Okay, first of all, I do want to say something to Tamika Palmer. Thank you. Thank you for all you've done. And I do want to say something to my good friend Lanita Baker, who has never failed to step up, never fallen down, does the right thing. Powerful sister. Go ahead. Having said that, now I can get back to it. Interim Dean Lars, is that right? Oh, Smith, Lars Smith. Thank you. I haven't met you, but thank you so much for opening today. My good friend Cedric Powell, Cedric, thank you for all that you do and the work that you continue to do. Your sincerity and the substance that you bring to the table is extraordinary. And for those who are not familiar with that, I'm telling you, you're really missing it, but you're actually being impacted by it all the time. Thank you, Cedric, for your work, please. And then I see an array of friends here over to my left who are here. For my portion, I take it very personal. We got, let's see, Miss Mildred McGuire over here, Miss Tuxon, my good friend, Raul Cunningham, you all know that name. He's done extraordinary work throughout his lifetime. And then our very good friend, Brenda Owens. Would you give them all a round of applause? And then think of all you. Appreciate you. So, let me go. We're talking about a social engineer, Dr. McNeil. We're getting ready to talk about one. It all fits. Darryl T. Owens was born in the Fort Hill neighborhood of Louisville. Owens was raised in a family that stressed a faith in God, strong family values, and the importance of educational attainment. With this firm foundation, he quietly became a giant as a civil rights leader, public servant, and a man of many firsts. Darryl Owens graduated from Central High School and from Central State University in Wilberforce, Ohio. He earned a Juris Doctorate degree from Howard University and returned home to Louisville, where he opened his law practice in 1965. Owens devoted his life to public service and civil rights. As an attorney, political candidate, and government official, where he broke racial barriers. He fought to assure access to those who had been left out and worked to ensure that those rights endured. From 1965 to 1969, Darryl Owens served as the first black assistant prosecutor of the Louisville Police Court. He became the first black assistant Kentucky Attorney General and the first black president of the Legal Aid Society. He served as NAACP president of the Louisville branch from 1970 to 1976. He served as a juvenile court judge in 1980 and served as the trial commissioner of Jefferson County Court. He served as a member of the Kentucky Workmen's Compensation Board and served on many boards and commissions throughout his career. For example, the University of Louisville Board of Trustees, the Louisville Urban League and local and state government advisory committees, the Young Men's Christian Association, YMCA, the Big Brothers and Sisters Program, homelessness programs, vocational educational programs, and various parks in Kentucky, and there's so much I have not mentioned here. Owens was the first African American elected to the Jefferson County Fiscal Court and served in that capacity for 21 years representing the C District. Then in 2005, he was elected to the Kentucky House of Representatives to serve District 43. Darryl Owens also became chairman of the Judiciary Committee during his time in the Kentucky House. He advocated for judicial reform, which included introducing and advocating for expungement legislation to help ex-felons get jobs and making it easier to remove felonies from their permanent record. He also sponsored legislation for reinstating voting rights for former felons. And that's just a little bit. I could go on and on all day talking about what Darryl Owens did in the House of Representatives. He was a strong believer in the transfer of knowledge to future generations. One of his mentors was Georgia Davis Powers, the first African American and first woman elected to the Kentucky Senate. He also worked with Raul Cunningham, the current president of the Louisville Jefferson County NAACP, and other leaders in their fight for fairness, justice, and equality for all. And of course, Darryl Owens has been a friend to many in this room. I trust many have interacted with him in ways that I don't even know. He certainly impacted my life. And for his contributions and for his service, it is in his name that the Darryl T. Owens Community Service Award was created by the University of Louisville Brandeis School of Law. So, with this inaugural Darryl T. Owens Community Service Award is to be presented to Amy Sherrill for her generous support and commitment to transformative social change and empowering undergraduate and law students to pursue public interest work. I do want to revisit this question about Amy Sherrill a little bit in depth, which a little bit was given early on. After painting a portrait of Breonna Taylor, the 26-year-old medical worker whose killing by police helped galvanize national protests, the artist decided she wanted the work to live on in public. Amy Sherrill's portrait of Breonna Taylor will be jointly owned by the Smithsonian's National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C., and the Speed Museum in Louisville. The institutions purchased the painting, I understand, and also is to be presented here, or is being presented here. Is that correct? Or is to be presented here. Sherrill plans to direct the funds as indicated from the painting's sales toward a program she is forming with the guidance of both foundations that will support students pursuing higher education who have an interest in social justice. And the reason I expand on that particular discussion is to show something that was just reflected, that everyone from wherever they are, they can be social engineers. And in this way, she has demonstrated that. And it's so apropos that she be awarded the first award in absentia. So that being said, I'm going to just simply present it.
Thank you so much. I have some remarks from Amy Sherrill. And let me just say, Representative Owens, when I first came here many years ago, I won't say how many years ago, he was always great and very generous and very welcoming when we came here. And I would always stop by his office. His office was where I go to get my hair cut. And so I would go around and knock on the door and always say, hey. And he was a great gentleman and public servant and really inspired me. These remarks are from Amy Sherrill. It is a great honor to accept this award in remembrance of Darryl Owens. Representative Owens was a lifelong public service servant advocating on behalf of the Louisville community. It is in recognition of that same community that I seek to honor the memory of Breonna Taylor through my work. I have long held the belief for the transformative power of education and its ability to foster new conversations and accelerate societal growth. With support from the Heartland Foundation and the Ford Foundation, it has become possible for me to realize those beliefs. I've created this trust to help unblock the challenges historically faced by students pursuing the work of social justice and public service while attending the University of Louisville. I'm proud to partner with the university as we continue to increase the rate of access and advocacy within the Louisville community and across this country with the Brandeis Law School's Breonna Taylor Legacy Fellowship and the Breonna Taylor Legacy Scholarship for undergraduates. Thank you so much for this award. I now have the distinct honor and privilege of bringing to the podium Vice President for Engagement, Douglas Craddock.
Pleasure to be here. So first of all, thank you, Cedric Powell, and everyone for being here today. I have the privilege and the honor to stand before you on behalf of our interim president, Lori Gonzalez, as well as my fellow administrators, faculty, staff, and students. When the law school really envision this lecture. I think we never could imagine how impactful, uplifting, and really how it could be and have us here today. So with that, I want to thank Dr. McNeil for such an empowering, as said earlier, lecture, but also one that gives us the opportunity to reflect, to think, and really critically examine the way in which we honor Breonna's legacy. So thank you for that wonderful lecture. Now, the purpose and reason we're here today is to honor her legacy. And from that, just not honor, but ultimately make the change from what the status quo is. And I say that the injustice of Breonna's murder can never be changed. But what we need to do is create atmospheres, create spaces, create conversations that illustrate the distinct nature in which we need to operate day in and day out. One part of that is the hard work of erasing inequalities and the devices that exist in our communities today. And today we are announcing a very special gift to U of L. You've heard some preliminary information about that gift, but it goes from Amy Sherrill, a visionary artist who painted a beautiful portrait of Breonna, and from that, no one is more deserving than the Community Service Award that she was able to receive on today. But a commitment for social justice goes far beyond that. Artist Amy Sherrill is donating the contributions from the trust established from the selling of the painting. And one thing I want to say in regards to that is many of us in this room that complete and do social justice work that affects diversity, equity, inclusion, the sweat equity that's involved within that work. Many times the monetary contributions that come from it are not often seen. It's more so through the hands, through the voices, through the things that we're doing. But in this regards, often saying is put your money where your mouth is. Amy Sherrill has truly done that. And I want to say that this gift totals $1 million. And I'm extremely humbled to say that as a black man, on behalf of the University of Louisville, for those contributions. And I also want to say that the scholarship and the fellowship of the students that will receive these, this is legacy building. This is generational building. These are opportunities that don't exist, as Ms. Baker said earlier, that she didn't have the opportunity to have. But from this impacts communities. This impacts the ways that we see each other. And I spoke earlier, somebody that will see somebody that looks like them and be able to surpass them in more ways than one. In addition to that, these individuals are committed, similar to Ms. Sherrill, by using their talents, their knowledge, their insight, and that passion and drive and determination for social justice. As stated earlier, the two foundations granted this are extremely important. The gift is made possible by the Ford Foundation, Kate Capshaw, Steven Spielberg, and the Heartland Foundation. Both of these, as spoke earlier, for the Museum of African American Culture in Washington, D.C., and our Speed Art Museum here in the city, have a shared ownership of the painting. And I'm happy to announce that that painting will return here in 2023 for everyone to see it. Also, all who benefit from this decision of her artistic gift, which is the gift that she has, will really illustrate the destructive measures of hatred and animosity and how this painting reflects how we're going against that day in and day out. Now, as I said, Ms. Sherrill, obviously she cannot be here today, but on behalf of the university, faculty, staff, students, everyone in this room, the entire community, those online, I want to say we thank you from the highest gratitude for the generosity of this gift. To my esteemed colleagues, Cedric Powell, Lauren McNeil, in addition to that, our dedicated public servant, Senator Gerald Neal, to the family of late Representative Darryl T. Owens, who served his district and his people oh so well, and to Breonna Taylor's mother, Mr. Mika Palmer. In addition to that, everyone else in this space, I want to say thank you for honoring Breonna Taylor in such a special way today. And I want to say a quote in the words of our former First Lady, or the First Lady, Michelle Obama, that you may not always have a comfortable life. You will not always be able to solve all the world's problems at once, but never underestimate the importance you can have, because history has always shown that courage is contagious and hope can take on a life of its own. So Ms. Baker put it out earlier. I want to say that I promise you that U of L will be a faithful steward of this gift. We will keep Ricky Jones involved. We will keep Aidna involved. Those individuals that not only do this work but have been doing it for so long will have a knowledge and expertise of what we're doing, and the many students that will be benefiting from this gift. I would also like to say that those students that will receive this gift will be keeping the dream of fair and a just world alive by exemplifying hope, persistence, and action. I leave by saying that each and every one of you in this room, has the capacity for change, and it's been spoken earlier. But I charge you with asking yourself, what change are you making compared to what change that you want to see? So thank you.
I want to thank everybody. It's taken a great deal of effort across the university to put this together. You just can't name individual people because you'll leave people out, but thank the law schools, thank the university, thank the development office, thank the communications office, everyone who I've exchanged emails with or been blind CC'd or copied on. Thank you so much, all the way up till today. And just navigating all of these things has been a great challenge, but well worth the effort. Thank you so much for everyone for coming. And I'm told that if the media wants to ask questions, the floor is open. We have until 5 o'clock. We have until 5 o'clock, so if anyone wants to ask questions from anyone who presented, that's fine. And then there is a reception following this. Thank you. They want to go to the reception. I can speak for the law school, and then we'll speak for the undergrad. Our plan is to have students involved in public service work. We already have a public service program. We're one of the first in the country to even have a public service requirement, 30 credit hours